Ty, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I'm really excited that you're here because I really enjoyed your book, The New CEO, and I cannot wait to dig deeper in a couple of questions that came up when I was reading the book. So thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me on, Dirk. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, because you're the global head of the CEO and executive transition practice at Russell Reynolds Associates, one of the leading executive firms in the world. But could you perhaps start by telling us what your role there entails?
Yeah, so leading the practice around transition means that the work that I do is primarily with CEOs and senior executives as they move into new roles. This is both externally recruited and internally promoted. As you know, from a Russell Reynolds point of view, we're a leadership advisory firm. We do a lot of work in terms of senior search work. And so the work that I do really focuses on how do we take these senior executives and CEOs and help them be successful through that first 12 to 18 months.
Yeah. Yeah, because your book, which you wrote about your experiences and recommendations, it contains a very nice and comprehensive 10-factor model for CEO transition success. And if you're okay, I'll include that model in the show notes.
Sure.
It's a great model because it describes, let's say, five different priorities and five approaches to take in these situations. So it's a great model. Can you tell something? How did you create a model? What was the data you used, the type of research that you did? How did you arrive at that model?
So it'd be great to say that I created that and then wrote the book and so forth. But the model actually came out of the book. So as I started to move the different topics that came up mostly with the clients that I worked with through their transition, we started to group them into sections. And it actually fit into this model whereby, the preparing to win component is sort of sits aside, but it is one of those aspects where the CEO needs to do the sort of thinking work and the preparation. And then there's four areas that really talk to the CEO's sort of learning and understanding of the situation that they've stepped into. And then there's five areas, which is the doing and the approach that the CEO takes. So that's how we sort of came up with the model.
Yeah. Because if I go back to the very heart of the book, at the start of the book, you paint a very dark picture of what it means to be a CEO. And I'll now do some quotes directly from the book. You describe it as, and I quote, complex, confusing, and often exhausting. And also, quote, the most challenging and loneliest role in business. And at the same time, you note that the average CEO tenure continues to decrease. Now, given all these factors, and purely out of curiosity, why do your clients still want to become CEOs in the first place?
Yeah, it's not meant to be a dark picture, but it's definitely supposed to be a realistic picture. I think the CEO role is the most challenging role in business. And it's one of those roles where it's very hard to understand it until you've sat in the chair. So it is a big surprise for a lot of CEOs. As part of the research I did around the book, I asked the question, what's the best and worst part about being a CEO? And the answer was often the same, and it was the responsibility. Um, I want the responsibility to make the decisions for the organization in order to build something of long-term value, or I want the responsibility to ensure that the organization does well over time. So that's a positive component. They wanted that. But the negative component is also the responsibility. And this sits with CEOs not only in terms of the financials of the organization, but it's the people, the people's families, the customers' families. The extent of responsibility that the CEO feels is intense. So you have to want both sides of that. And being CEO, whilst a lot of people aspire to it, it's not something that everyone really will enjoy or do well at. So I think it really needs to be something you consider carefully.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. But what's also interesting in the book is you have interviewed a number of CEOs, and one of them is Nancy McKinstry, the CEO and chairman of the executive board of Wolters Kluwer, and she writes that you can never be 100% ready to become a CEO. What does she mean by that?
This is one of the key tenets of what I sort of learned through the work that I've done and also the people I spoke to is that we all have a view of the CEO role. We watch it. You can be very, very close to it. And one of the people I got the chance to talk to was Ramon Laguarta from PepsiCo. And
Hmm.
he had been right there with the CEO for
Yeah,
a long period of time. And when he became CEO, he said, it's massively different to what I thought. And it's so more complex and challenging. So being CEO is a unique position in the organization. And whilst you think you know what it's going to be like, it's not. It's unlikely that you're going to understand exactly what's involved. So this is one of the watch outs for CEOs going in is don't feel bad that you step into the role and think, whoa, there's more here than I thought. This is harder than I thought. This is different to what I thought, because most people experience that. And it's a positive in many ways that you actually see that and you're sort of vulnerable and humble enough to understand that.
yeah. Yeah, because one of the things that I read in the book and that actually struck me is there are also a number of CEOs that manage one of the major business units of their companies for a long time. So you would expect that they know all the ins and outs of the CEO role, and that, let's say, stepping up from a head of the business unit to a CEO is kind of, a gradual change, but it's actually a kind of shift change, right?
Yeah, it's a big shift.
Yeah.
And you can run large businesses within organizations. You often see CEOs going from running billion-dollar divisions to being a CEO of a smaller entity. And they'll think that this is something that's an easy transition. But one of those key aspects is when you're in a division, you still have somebody else who
Yeah.
ultimately takes responsibility and ultimately takes um, the big decisions. And so you lose that person who sort of supports what you do. You're far more in the limelight. You're well known, but when you become CEO, you're the main attraction. You're also often dealing directly with the board, and that is a change. And a lot of executives, they go to board meetings, they present, they know the board. Again, when you become CEO, the relationship with the board changes, and it's very different from going in and presenting your results to being there all through that board meeting and being on call to the board and having multiple bosses. We go through our career generally having one boss as an individual, and then we get to that CEO role, and obviously that's the big shift that we get in terms of that. So it is a big difference to even running large divisions within organizations.
Yeah, because you also write in the book, and that was also an interesting notion for me, that the types of issues you get confronted with as CEO, or as a CEO, is also quite hard, right? Because usually, and you write it very eloquently, it's issues that could not be solved, lower down the organization, and they're often issues where you have to basically choose the worst of two alternatives. Can you say a few words around it? Because that's also a factor that seems to make the role less attractive than a lot of people might think.
But this is the aspect around not having someone else to make that decision for you.
Yeah.
So you are the last sort of, the end of the process. You have to make those big decisions. And when you're CEO, the stuff that comes to your desk is always the hard stuff because everything else that can be solved is solved. So the stuff that escalates and elevates up to the CEO's desk is the stuff that can't be solved. And intrinsically, it's very, very difficult. And then there is that component, which is, what I refer to as a judgment call.
Hmm.
As CEO, it's easy when there's a clear winner and a clear loser. There's an obvious choice. We absolutely should this, we should do this, and we should absolutely not do that. But in a lot of cases, because of your role, you're making the best place decision based on what you see as the future of the organization. So there isn't a clear right or wrong. And the organization's kind of looking at you and going, Dirk, it's just you. You just need to tell us what to do. And those judgment calls are quite challenging.
Yeah.
And as Lisa McGowan described in the book, is she said you often have, bad option, worse option, even worse option, and you have to pick one of these options. And then, as she says, you have to produce or sort of do the alchemy component of telling the organization that it's the best outcome. And that's quite challenging because, yes, it's the best outcome, but none of them are good.
Yeah, agree. But you write in the book that a CEO transition takes 12 to 18 months. But that seems like a very long time in a world which is driven by quarterly results. So in that context, I've got two questions. So my first question is, why does it take so long? And the second question is, how does this 12 to 18 months period relate to the grace periods that boards and investors typically grant the new CEO?
Every sort of CEO transition is a little unique, and there are some key drivers in terms of the speed of the transition. One is the business situation. So if the business is a continuing success business, then there's one implication. If it's a turnaround business, then there's an increased pressure in terms of making decisions, so CEOs will move faster. I think the CEO role, again, to really understand the scope of the organization and all the levers that you have as CEO, when you pull X, this is what happens. It takes time. And so 6 months is normally the time that CEOs have really started, that they've been through the listening tour, they've got a read on the culture, they've started to circulate strategic thoughts and directions with the board. I mean, most CEOs will take 6 to 9 months before they put their strategy together for the board. And that sits in line with a lot of the board expectations. One of the key levers for CEOs is their team. And in the research, I really looked into detail in terms of when do CEOs start making changes? When do CEOs get the team in place? And when do CEOs get them to performing? And that was 2.8 months for the first change. It was about 9.2 months to get everyone in place. So already you're at 9 months and you've just got your team.
Yeah.
And then it's 11 to 14 months before they're performing at a high level. So this is a key lever. CEO role can't be done on its own. And a CEO won't be successful if the team is not high performing. So automatically you've had a year just to get the team in place, let alone starting to shift the culture. And what we see is this, as you're moving through transition as a CEO, you are doing things that look good. There's normally a couple of early wins. You've made some small changes. You've started to recruit what looks to be really good people. You've set out a strategy and a vision, which all looks good. You've talked about organizational culture change, and that all sounds good. And that's great. That's the first year. Then the second year, people actually get to see whether those decisions were actually good. Is this good individuals? Are these people going to be a team? Is this cultural shift going to change? Are we going to start to see some results? Which is why we tend to see more CEOs being removed in the second year than the first year.
Yeah.
Because the first year you're doing the things that sort of look good.
Yeah, you kind of do the investments for let's say the second year, and then you need in the second year to reap the benefits.
Correct. You're proving in the second year if the bets that you made in the first year were the right ones.
That's a beautiful analogy.
And it's here that the market and the board get nervous if they're not seeing those results.
Yeah.
So one of the pieces of advice I give to CEOs as they come to the end of the first year is to reset the narrative with the board. Don't let the opportunity pass for you to take the board back through your first year in a way that talks about where and how you spent your time and why that was important, what foundations you've put in place, what your expectations are with the team, because it's sort of at that year that the board and the CEO can start to do this. And when I get in and start talking to the board, I realize that their expectations have shifted with through a discussion that happened without the CEO or something that happened externally. So it is quite important to get into that second year. And that's why that transition period to really feeling comfortable is quite important. And, CEOs will say to me, normally between sort of 8 and 10 months is normally when they come to me and they say, I've stopped turning over rocks and finding new problems. I'm turning over rocks and I'm finding things I already knew were there. I'm starting to feel a little bit better.
Yeah, that's a beautiful analogy. Thank you for sharing that. A concrete piece of advice which you give in the book is that you recommend CEOs to create a clear transition plan, and that's, I think, a key point before they even start in their new role. What should such a plan look like, Ty? What should it contain? Who should they talk to in order to gather relevant data? Can you share a few words around that?
Yeah, I mean, the transition planning process, I've come to love this quote, and I might not get it right, but it's along the lines of plans are useless, but planning is invaluable.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
the process of planning is what's most important. So the first transition plan is normally the information, the learning, the understanding that the CEO goes through in preparation to start. So what do I need to get in order to start? And then when I start, what does that look like? So who am I meeting? What's my listening tour look like? What is my early communication so that I don't send a message down that I don't really want, or I scare the organization, or I scare the market. So this first sort of 3 months period is quite intense, and it's transition planning and onboarding. And then you'll see after 3 months, CEOs will often make a 6-month plan to get them through that strategy formulation, to get them through the culture assessment, to get the team in place, and getting up to that point. And then you'll start to see almost a 1,000-day plan, which is, okay, now I'm into the 3-year window and I need to start spreading this out. So it needs to be flexible, but having a plan serves a number of purposes. If you're new to the CEO role, you can use the plan to test your assumptions with the board. So what you're saying to the board is, here's what I'm going to do, here's what I'm going to spend my time on, here's where I'm spending my attention, etc. And so if the board are saying, well, hang on, you're doing the wrong things or you're in the wrong areas, they can have that discussion. It's far better to do that over a transition plan than 6 months down the track when you're having
yeah,
a quick
yeah,
review
yeah,
of,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
we had hoped you would do all these things and you didn't.
Yeah, yeah, but I expected that you would be okay with that. Yeah, yeah, it's a great calibration moment. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
So you
then
need to, again, this is about setting that expectation. And when you step in to be CEO for the first time, there is a degree of things that you don't know that you don't know. So fleshing this out and being quite explicit with what you plan to do is very helpful.
yeah. And how does it work, Ty, if CEOs need to take over a CEO role in kind of stealth mode? I mean, in a number of times in my career, I witnessed that the previous CEO was blissfully unaware that his successor was being recruited and was waiting in the wings, and then got a kind of heads up, sometimes only 24 hours, before the actual handover that your successor is ready and will be announced tomorrow. So how do you advise CEOs who find themselves in the position that they cannot broadly engage a number of people in and around the organization? What would your recommendations for them be to optimally prepare themselves?
Well, clearly this is, probably one of the worst sort of scenarios that we
Yeah,
would look at. And it will generally come because the business is not performing. So you're going to have challenges with the outgoing CEO and the management team who don't know this is happening. But you've also got an overlay of challenge because the business is likely to be underperforming.
yeah,
So
true.
you're going to have to,
Yeah,
there's things you're going to have
there's
to
a
be moving
reason.
on.
There's a reason why you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
correct.
yeah,
There's a reason for this. So in those circumstances, we do a lot of work around communication because we know that as soon as it's announced, we have to be very much on the front foot in terms of that early communication. And we have to be acknowledging that this is a shock. So you're going to miss some opportunities if you come out day one and start to talk about the vision of the organization 3 to 5 years from now, because everyone in the room is thinking, oh my goodness, what does this mean for me? So they're not listening at all about the future. So you have to deal with that differently when they don't know. So it's shoring up some of the key players. So there'll normally be a list of high potential or performing leaders that you absolutely want to keep. So you need to get to those people very quickly. You need to shore up or reduce the level of anxiety at lower levels. So there's a calming of the messaging, and it's also good if in that case that there's messaging coming from the board and the new CEO, because the board have essentially made this decision. So they need to own some of this process up front and talk about what happened, why we chose to do it like this, and how are we working with that? Because, like I said, there'll be a lot of shock. You can imagine the conversations at people's dinner tables.
I witnessed it multiple times from before.
Yeah, like what does this mean for you?
Exactly.
Are you okay? Are you safe? Like everyone will become very internally focused. So you have to tread a little bit more carefully. And the thing to stop is new CEOs often get quite excited. This is part of the role. They've stepped into this role and they're excited to do all this stuff.
Yeah, they are happy.
In that circumstance, you can't talk about all the exciting stuff. You have to deal with the stress and the anxiety of the situation that you've caused.
Hey, you also recommend new CEOs, and we talked about this a little bit already in one of the earlier questions, but you recommend new CEOs to balance patience and action, resisting major decisions early on because they may not have all the data. However, if they wait too long, they could lose momentum, both internally as well as externally. So how do CEOs know that they're kind of in the sweet spot, to put it in tennis terms? What would your recommendations be?
No, you definitely want to be in the sweet spot, not the dead zone where the ball's sort of falling at your feet.
Yeah, exactly. Or basically too early that you can't control it. Yeah.
It is a real challenge, and there's nuances for every CEO. Being very transparent and open about how long and what you're focusing on in the learning helps that process, because people will then hear what you're doing and not be expecting the action. Finding things early that you need to work on. So in the book, I talk about the difference between things that are on fire and things that are smoldering. When you come into the CEO role, there's a lot of things that will be smoldering and have been for a long time. And you need to be really careful that you don't pick up something which is interesting but not urgent, and you miss the opportunity to work on the ones that are on fire. If something's on fire, you need to work on it and you need to put it out. If it's smoldering, you can take your time a little bit. And those early actions have wide-reaching implications. So when I talk with clients, I talk to them ahead of time. What do you think are going to be some of the early actions? As they move around in their listening tour, what are you hearing from people? What are some of the small things that are irritating and sapping their motivation? What are some of the big things that you could fix? It's not a great analogy, and I don't encourage clients to use it. But if you think about it, when you're moving around, you're almost asking people, if I had a small wand and a big wand, what would you get me to do? And they'll say things like, fix the photocopier on level 5 because it's never worked. And let's broaden our strategy to move into India. So it's like significant stuff. So what do you need to be doing? Because when you make some of those early actions, you send a really clear message. Are you doing something for the organization? Are you doing something for the market? Are you doing something for the shareholders? Like, what is the first thing that you do? And I often encourage CEOs that if you can find some pain points that are in the organization, things that frustrate, things that demotivate, and you can fix some of those things early, that says a lot to the organization about where they sit on your priority list. And it certainly helps you when you want to move the organization in a different direction. So this listening, acting, I think, is the biggest challenge for new CEOs. And the other thing that I'll mention, which I think is really important, is more often than not, the pressure to act fast is only coming from the CEO themselves. So I'll have conversations with clients. I have this conversation quite regularly. We'll be talking and they'll say something like, oh, the board the board said that I need to do this thing within 3 months. And I'll say, wow, is that exactly what the board said? No, no, no. The board said that I should, and that this is something I should do quickly. And I'll say, so what's quickly? Because you put the 3-month mantle on it. Now you've put yourself under pressure. You need to work out what that is. And this is one of the things with all transitions, words like good, big, fast, quality, service, they're ambiguous terms. If you're new to an organization, you need to ask people, what does good mean here?
Yeah.
What does fast?
Yeah.
Because otherwise what's going on in the CEO's mind is I need to prove
Yeah. You have this
to the
continuous
market.
translation in a sense of bold
Correct.
means shedding this product line. Expansion means moving to India tomorrow. Quick means next 2
Tomorrow.
weeks. Yeah.
And the board says, no, we think it will take you 6 months to work this out. So we would be disappointed if you made that decision. So these are some of the mistakes that you can make early, well-intended, that damage the credibility and the momentum a little bit. You just need to work out, and I always ask, where is the pressure to do that coming from? Because if it's coming from you, then we need to go get some other sources.
Yeah. No, that is good guidance. And what I found interesting, if I contrast that a little bit, so in terms of the content of the work, your recommendations would be to, basically don't act, hastily, take your time, get a good feel for, the lay of the land, real priorities, etc. So be patient. But on the other hand, regarding teams, you encourage, let's say, CEOs to move faster, right? You say you'll use the first 3 months to assess, decide on structure, make your changes. But how could CEOs do this in a kind of orderly way, especially since they're still learning the business, and they might also be in a situation where they're highly dependent on their direct report. So how should they practically? So I guess my question first would be from why do they kind of need to take action on that front relatively fast, and secondly, how can they pragmatically do that given their dependency on the people that they need to move with?
The most common response to what would you have done differently if you had this transition again, when you
Hmm.
ask CEOs around the 12-month mark, and it's my research and other people's research as well, the number one answer is always, I would have moved faster on my team.
Hmm.
It's very rarely, I wish I had divested that business or done that M&A or that sort of stuff. So there's a difference here. There is understanding the organization enough to make some of those big strategic moves, and early quick wins different to early moves. With the team, you need to get moving on that pretty quickly. And a lot of CEOs and senior leaders, they're fairly attuned to the type of people that work well with them. They have good radars. They've been working with people for a large amount of their career. And so a lot of the times the CEO will have an idea of this person is a star and we need to keep this person. This person is not, and I need to start moving on this person fairly quickly. The question I ask when CEOs are sort of umming and erring about this, because they'll second guess their decisions.
No, of course, yeah. It's a massive
Is
decision, right? Yeah.
correct. Is knowing what you know now, would you rehire this person for their role if they came back to you? And that's always a very telling question, because it's a yes or a no, really. And if it's a no, then to your point, there's a sequencing discussion. So if you think about it as sort of a normal curve of productivity, there's a tipping point where the person ceases to be beneficial and starts to detract. So if their attitude has tipped them over, then you need to move on them. If they're hurting what you want to do and they're damaging the ability for you to have impact, you need to remove them. If they're still supportive, but not the right person for you longer term, then you can probably do that sequentially. That being said, it's not until you get your full team together that you can really start to advance the high performing aspects of that. So I will sometimes go with clients to their senior leadership team meetings and their offsites. And what you notice is they might have 5 or 6 of the people that they want and 2 or 3 that they know they're going to change when they can. And so the ability to build a high-performing team, that's just not there. So you do lose some speed of development of the team by keeping them. But yeah, sometimes you have people where you can't just remove them all because the organization will cease to function. That being said, you need to put things in place as quickly as you can. Because I'll go back to what I said before. If it takes you 9 months to get people in their chairs and 11 to 14 months before you can sit back and say, now they're performing, that's 11 to 14 months before you start to do the things that only you can do.
That you were hired for. Yeah.
Correct. Because in between, you are doing part COO, part CFO, part CMO, part CHRO. You're like this jack of all trades individual. You're not doing the job that you were hired to do. And if you're not doing it, nobody's doing it.
Yeah. My question would be, Ty, from a very, let's say, practical point of view. If I were basically the CEO and I would talk to my direct reports and I would start to have, let's say, some doubts regarding, if someone would be a member of my team or not, and I would just not be sure. What would you practically recommend? Are there formal processes to go through in formal data seeking? Is there a particular approach? So let's say I'm a new CEO. I talk to a CFO. I'm not sure if he's got, really what it takes. But what would you recommend them to do?
Well, so there's a number of data points or processes you can go through, and one is formal assessment. So Hans Vestberg at Verizon did this with 200 odd leaders. He ran them through an assessment process because he wanted to make sure that he was not falling victim to his own bias. He knew that HR would have a view and potentially a bias. And so he wanted to sort of create an apples for apples. So who have we got? Where's their current, where are they in their current level of capability versus potential? So we sort of work out, have we got people that are doing well but are maxed out? Have we got people that are have potential? And he really wanted to find out too, have we got the right people in the wrong roles? Because that will often happen in big organizations as people get moved around. So he did that right at the beginning. He did the same thing when he was at Ericsson. And it just gave him this basis of data to be able to move quickly with some of these decisions. So if you're really on the fence, obviously this is not a great position for a CEO. You can't sort of sit on the fence for many things for very long.
No.
But you can bring some other data in, and there'll be some views from the board, but you need to be careful of that as well. Ultimately, that question that I asked before tends to bring it to a head.
Yeah. Would you rehire?
Because the CEO just says, no, I wouldn't. Okay, so that doesn't mean that the person's bad. And remember, when you come in as new CEO, you have this benefit of time horizon. So it's nice and it's easy to say, this is the great team for now. But to the board, you're saying, but I want to build the team for 3 years from now, and this is not the team. So we want to thank these people. They've brought us to where we are. They're not bad people, but the organization that I see 3 years from now, it needs different capabilities. And that's that component of asking the question of what leadership capabilities do we need? What do we have? And how do we close the gap? And not starting at the second one and getting locked into the names that are already in the boxes.
Yeah. Another recommendation in your book for new CEOs is the importance of bursting, as you call it, the CEO bubble. What exactly is this bubble, Ty, and how can they burst it? How can a CEO ensure they receive all the information they need, especially when there's a tendency from direct reports to manage, and you describe in your book, even rehearse how they should bring the news before it gets to them?
Well, the first thing is the CEO needs to accept that he or she are never going to get all of the information. It's just the nature of the role. As soon as you become CEO, there's a change in how people manage information to you. And a lot of times it's not negative, it's not deceitful. It's just the respect for the role and for the position.
Yeah.
And when you step from the C-suite into the CEO role, what you realize is the C-suite is the thickest layer of sort of difficulty in terms of information flow. It stops the information going down and it stops the information coming up. They're the last people to put the full stops and the graphs into the PowerPoint deck and to put the narrative on what's happening. So CEOs are encouraged to do skip meetings. They're encouraged to get out and run meetings with other leaders without their C-suite. It's, again, you're not trying to exclude them, but it's an opportunity to do that. So a lot of CEOs will have a top 50, a top 100, top 200 that they'll work with in the organization. So that's the first thing. So recognizing that you're not going to get it is important. So how do you keep people close to you who will actually tell you the truth? How do you keep people that have this attitude that they will bring things to you? And how do you keep working the organization to make sure that as much of it gets through? But you don't. And the expression I sort of give to clients is, when you get to the CEO role, you will see more, but you will hear less. And it's just the nature of things. So there is, if you have an opportunity as a CEO to know that you're going to be CEO but not be announced, I refer to that as the golden period, because you can run around the organization in your old role, asking all the questions that you're going to want to ask when you're CEO, and you know that they're not going to tell you once you're there. So there's that important. The only other thing I will say is, in some cases, people will be more candid early on. So if you're a CEO coming into an organization, day 1, day 2, day 10, people will be a little bit more candid with you because you haven't been there long enough to really not be a threat, but there's a period of time where people will just tell you, and then they get quite reserved.
Yeah.
And they go, no. Now it's not in my interest.
Yeah.
And it's not a safe thing to do.
Yeah.
And you as CEO need to be really careful with that early on, how you respond to that early feedback, pushback, challenge. Everyone in the organization will hear that first story.
Yeah.
So if you cross your arms and put your head back when someone says something in the meeting, by that afternoon, the whole organization will have heard that.
Yeah.
So you have to be so on top of this, which is why it's so exhausting. You can't relax. You have to be mindful of what you're doing and what you're saying and how you're approaching things and your tone. This is part of the intensity of the role.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what the role requires you to do. Yeah, yeah. You might think this is the worst presentation you've ever seen, but your body language, will be something that you need to tightly control on in the interest of the role and the company. Yeah. In that sense, I had another question. We live, as you know, in an increasingly polarized world, and there's a growing pressure on CEOs to speak up and take action on political issues. I mean, two issues that immediately jump to mind are, for instance, the war in Ukraine, crisis in Gaza. So there's a pressure on CEOs to take a public stand on behalf of their companies. How do you sit in that discussion? What is your recommendation?
I think there's probably two sides of two approaches CEOs take. And one is, where they take the view that they absolutely should not be commenting on anything that doesn't relate to their organization. And a lot of times the CEOs that take that view are quite authentically saying, I'm not an expert in any of these matters. I know, this thing that we make. So this is where my expertise extends. And just being CEO does not make me an expert or someone that you should comment on that. Of course, the other side is that CEOs take the view that they represent a community of individuals and that they can speak to help that community and that they should speak out. And there's a lot of pressure to speak out. You think about being a CEO. Imagine the amount of emails that come to you directly from staff wanting you to make a comment on something that they are extremely passionate about, and rightly so. So one of the things that I suggest to clients before they even start is it's a good conversation to have with the board about what do we as an organization agree we are going to talk about. What are we going to comment on? Now, we don't know the next situation, but we can group them into pandemics,
Yeah,
wars,
economics,
terrorist activities,
elections. Yeah,
police
yeah,
activity, election. Like we know
yeah,
the buckets.
yeah. We know the buckets. Yeah, I love that statement. Yeah, yeah,
What's our view? What are we going
yeah,
to talk about? And have a statement that sort of talks about that up front, because when something happens, if you comment early or you comment late or you don't comment, you're still going to upset a group of constituents.
yeah,
So when you notice organizations waiting, they tend to get as much negativity as someone who comes out and says something wrong.
yeah,
Now, the two examples that you gave, if you'd have taken a snapshot of those at the beginning, it would have been a certain position that you might have taken. If you were to take a snapshot now, those two things have progressed a long way and they have become hot topics. And you really, as CEO, need to be clear that commenting on those things is in the best interest of your employees and your shareholders. And if it's not, then it's probably something to stay clear of. Because once you start commenting, you can't stop. You can't say, I'm not going to talk about that anymore.
no,
If you've made a statement, you're in the media, you're in the mix.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it will be increasingly difficult to move. But 3 months ago, you
Yeah.
said, and your initial reaction was, and was that wrong? And yeah, yeah, yeah,
And this is at a time when you want to be talking about things that your organization is doing.
yeah.
And
Correct.
you
Yeah.
can't, because you've now, the most common quote from you is something that you've said somewhere else.
Hey, Ty, my last question would be, we have discussed a number of different aspects of CEO transitions. Are there any things that we have not discussed which you think would be important to mention?
We've talked a little bit about the board, but the board is a significant change for a CEO. As I said before, it's one thing to go and share your presentations and to know the board. It's another thing to be reporting into the board, to reporting into a group of individuals, to need to build a really good relationship with the chair. You'll hear in the book a lot of CEOs spent good amounts of time, like whole days, with directors early on to make sure that they understood the director's expectation, the director's view of the opportunities to the organization, the director's view on the dynamics of the board, where the board should stop, where the board should intervene. There's always opportunity for some friction with the
Yeah,
board. So doing that up front is really important. The second regret that comes up, and definitely came up in my research, is people wish that they had engaged the board more effectively early.
hmm,
So when you're doing all of these things, sometimes the board will be quiet and give you space. You need to spend time with them, because when you turn around and say, okay, we're going to make these changes, the board needs to be, excuse the pun, on board. And if
yeah,
they're not, you're really going to struggle. So that's one of those things. And I asked the question in my research, how much time in the first year did CEOs spend on board or board-related activities? And it was 25% of their time. So
wow,
if you're a
yeah,
CEO about to step into the role and you're thinking of all the things that you're going to do
yeah,
in your week, I'm going to tell you, you're going to lose a day and a half to the board.
yeah. You
So
have
whatever you
for
thought
you,
you were going to
yeah,
do,
yeah, yeah. You can effectively only start working Tuesday afternoon.
correct. It's when
Yeah,
your week starts.
yeah, yeah,
So I think that's a big aspect. Um, and I think the other thing that I would suggest is, when you become CEO, not only is the role different, but the people you need around you are different too. So one
hmm,
of the encouragements that I make to clients, and one of the things that I do for clients, is as soon as we find out that they're going to be CEO, which is normally when I start working with them, is I start to network them into other CEOs.
hmm.
Because at some point, you're just going to need to sit with somebody who understands,
Yeah, yeah.
and you
You
just
need to
say,
be able to
this
vent. Yeah,
happened.
yeah,
And they go, yeah, that happened to me too.
yeah,
And do you have an answer? No. Great. So you need a different kitchen cabinet around you from being CFO to CEO, from CMO to CEO. And those are good people to have around you.
Well, Ty, thank you so much for doing this interview. I learned a lot from it, and I'm absolutely sure that our viewers and listeners will have done so as well. Thank you very much for participating in the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.